my name is Sarah and welcome to my channel Growing, Glowing and Going. My channel is about growing, so growing my garden and also looking after my fabulous houseplants. It is about glowing, so looking after yourself inside and out, so having a physical glow up or improving your mental health. And it's also about going, which is travel and adventure, which is a huge passion of mine. And today's video is all about 5 things you need to know before you walk the INCA Trail in wet season. For some context, I walked the INCA Trail at the end of October 2023. I did the trek with G Adventures, and I probably don't need to sell the trip to you if you are already here. I'm sorry to be that guy, but it was absolutely incredible. It was life-changing. It was not without its difficulties, a little bit I will talk about today, but yeah, absolutely worthwhile and yeah, well worth the money and the effort, and yeah, it's just amazing. As you can imagine, I read a lot of blogs and articles and I watched a lot of videos on YouTube before I went, specifically about going in the wet season, and I was possibly quite unprepared for my trip because most of these articles and vlogs said, oh hey, it really didn't rain very much, or you know, it didn't actually rain at all, people who went in the wet season. I found something slightly different, unfortunately. So this is why I'm talking specifically about 5 things you need to know for the wet season. The wet season starts in around October. So we were there, I think we started the INCA Trail on October the 26th. And we did the 4-day trek, 3-night trek. The wet season ends in March. So if you are going anytime between, I'd say, early October and the end of March, this video is going to be essential for you. The first thing I want to tell you about the INCA Trail in the wet season is that when it rains, it absolutely pours down for ages. I've been in tropical countries where it's rained before and it has absolutely chucked it down, but it's chucked it down for an hour. And then after that, it's been absolute glorious sunshine. So from the vlogs and the articles I read, and also my personal experience in places like Bali, that's what I was expecting. I was like, hey, we'll get wet for an hour and then we'll just walk and we'll dry off, we'll be cool. So even when we were going to outdoor shops and we were buying our equipment, we were buying waterproofs with the idea that they would only have to be waterproof for an hour or 2 at a time. I think we were being naive, but also everybody else on our trip said very similar things, that they expected it to be like tropical rainstorms, and that they only kind of brought one lot of waterproof kit. Just to give you an idea, our first 2 days were dry. Our 3rd day, I think maybe about 3 a.m, the rain woke me up and it battered down on the tent. So we had to get up, we put our waterproofs on straight away. You get up about 5 a.m. on the INCA Trail, so we were having our breakfast at kind of 5:30, absolutely throwing it down. And in my mind, I was like, it'll stop soon, it'll stop before we start walking. We start walking at 6, it carries on raining, as you can imagine. By, I want to say 8 o'clock, the rain has already gone through all of my waterproofs. It started going through my bag, and we are walking through the most spectacular scenery right now, by the way. Like, I am not trying to put you off here. Even with the rain, it was incredible. At the start of the 3rd day, you actually walk up and you go to a historic site. So we were walking around there in the absolute throwing down rain. So it was still beautiful. And this 3rd day is a little bit up, a little bit down, just nothing too strenuous. But we were very much in what's felt like a rainforest. When you walk the INCA Trail, you go through lots of different scenery, and so some of it will feel very mountainous, some of it almost deserty, but at this point it was very rainforest, which is why I think it was raining so much. So it got to about 2, just before, maybe a little bit earlier than that actually, because it was just before lunch, so maybe 12. So we had been walking in the rain for about 6 hours, and honestly we're starting to get a little fed up of being so wet. But we started walking up to the lunch site and it stopped raining, thankfully. So I peeled some layers off, I let some of them dry just around my waist and things, and that was the only way to dry it really. Unfortunately, you're not at camp in daylight long enough to be able to dry things or leave them out. The next day was Machu Picchu day. Of course, we were so excited. We woke up at 3. You wake up at 3 because your porters want to take all the tents down, and then they have to get their train home at 5:30. So we wake up at 3, we have our breakfast, we're leaving camp about 4. It is dry, we are so happy. And we are waiting to start the trail. Your guide gets you through like a checkpoint into the actual walk to Machu Picchu, and it starts spitting, and after that again it starts chucking it down. It starts chucking it down all the way to starting to view Machu Picchu, and then it clears up again. But I will talk a little bit about Machu Picchu a little bit later, because that is one of the things we need to talk about. So big lesson: bring a couple of different waterproofs if you can. Have a waterproof bag cover, have waterproof covers for your passport, for your camera, for your phone, everything, because if you are going to get wet, then you are going to get really wet. The second thing I want to tell you about wet season on the INCA Trail is that ironically, it's actually slightly warmer during wet season than it is during dry season. And that's actually one of the reasons I decided to go during wet season. It's a little bit cheaper, not a huge amount, but a little bit. But I really, really struggle in the cold. So I wanted to be above freezing at nighttime. And actually it's quite significantly above freezing at nighttime. I think it was no colder than 10 degrees centigrade at nighttime. But it's worth bearing in mind that the tour company that you go through, the sleeping bags that you hire are probably going to be quite thick ones that are made for dry season. I found myself getting quite warm during the night, and I ended up being outside of my sleeping bag a lot. So if you can hire in Cuzco, or even if you have space in your baggage to take over a slightly thinner sleeping bag, even if it means that you take some thermal pajamas or just some different layers to wear at nighttime, I would really recommend considering doing that. Our sleeping bags were way too thick, and actually that had a big knock-on effect on the third thing I want to tell you about, which is your bag weight. No matter which tour company you go with, your porters are only allowed to carry 20 kilos each, which is very fair. Wait till you see how much they are lugging along the INCA Trail and these challenging trails. You will really feel sorry for them and almost think they should be carrying less. But that means that you can only take 6 kilos. That includes your sleeping bag and your sleeping mat and literally anything that you want the porters to carry. So your sleeping bag, or the sleeping bags that we use from G Adventures, plus the mats, they were 3.5 kilos, which left us 2.5 kilos to put in the bag. And if you had told me that before the INCA Trail, I would have been like, that is absolutely fine. I can fit all my stuff in 2.5 kilos, no problem. But the most stressful moment of the INCA Trail for us was the night before we even set off on the trip in our Airbnb, when we were trying to pack our bags into just 2.5 kilos. It is nothing. So it's worth considering the sleeping bag point I just made. And I would also highly, highly recommend practicing at home even before you set off to Peru. packing your stuff into 2.5 kilos or whatever you need when you've decided which sleeping bag you're going to hire. I ended up not taking a lot of stuff that I had planned on taking on the INCA Trail, like a spare pair of camp shoes. I really missed out on those. When you get to camp, you really just want to give your feet a rest from your hiking shoes. So I really missed out on that. So yes, definitely practice. And also, we have one now, but we didn't have one at the time. If you can take one of those little luggage weighers with you, that will be so useful for this. Number 4 that you should definitely know before you do the INCA Trail in wet weather is that you have to be super careful on the trail when it is wet. This trail is ancient. There are old polished stones on the trail. There are no barriers. Some of the paths are quite narrow, and very often your guide will tell you, but also your guide might be at the front or your guide might be at the back. So they may not necessarily be straight away there to tell you. Keep your eyes on the trail. Concentrate. I know it's so exciting when you start seeing Machu Picchu. You hit the sun gate and everybody starts feeling really giddy. And we unfortunately saw an accident at the sun gate, which I'm still a little bit traumatized by. And it was from somebody slipping and also being a little bit giddy. He was okay in the end. He walked away and we saw him walking around Machu Picchu. So all is well that ends well. But you just need to know that, yeah, these are old paths. They are not up to health and safety. So you need to be so careful. And something that is optional before you start the hike is whether you hire poles or whether you take poles. My partner and I, we actually considered not hiring poles because it's not something that we're particularly used to. In the end, we did decide to hire the poles, and I am so glad we did that. Not only because they take a lot of pressure off your legs, but also when it's slippy, they just add extra support for you. So even if you're not comfortable with them, or normally you're a confident hiker without poles, if you are doing the INCA Trail during the wet season, I would 100% recommend taking poles. If you don't have any, hire them from your tour company or somewhere in Cuzco even. There'll be lots of places to hire from. I'm sorry to take us to a slightly low note just then, but it was something that needed to be said. But I'm going to bring us back up again. And number 5 thing that you need to know is about Machu Picchu. And the whole point of doing the INCA Trail, I know the journey is fun and it is life-changing, etc., etc. But the big deal is Machu Picchu, right? So if you arrive at the sun gate and you see absolutely nothing other than clouds, which is exactly what we saw because it was so wet, do not worry. I was prepared for this from videos on TikTok where people just saw clouds, and you feel so disheartened because you're like, I have walked all this way and I'm not going to see Machu Picchu in its full glory. Do not worry, because you'll start walking down towards Machu Picchu as the day starts to get brighter and the sun starts to come out. The sun will burn the clouds away. I'm gonna say pretty categorically. I think the guide said that it almost always happens. Although we were in a lot of wet weather for pretty much a lot of the day on one of the days of the INCA Trail, we were a lot higher and we were also in very heavy rainforest. When you start getting to Machu Picchu, you're actually quite a lot lower than you are at some points in the walk. So the weather is naturally better and you're not in the rainforest anymore. As the clouds started to part and you see Machu Picchu, oh, I'm honestly getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It is the most incredible experience. I like to see things with my own eyes, most importantly, but I also took some photos with the clouds that just look utterly magical. Like, they look like something off National Geographic, and I cannot hopefully I'm doing some justice to it, but I can't really explain that feeling when you walk down to Machu Picchu and you start going actually into the grounds and you see the alpacas just grazing and you see the mountains and then you actually see the building. It is all worth it. You even forget about the trauma of Dead Woman's Pass, which is, 1,500 meters of elevation in a couple of hours, which was really hard work for me. But anyway, like I said, I'd forgotten about it, and it was actually the best weather of our entire trip. It was absolutely blazing hot, and I got a tan that day. The worst thing about Machu Picchu is leaving, because you have a train time booked in Aguascalientes to get back to Cuzco. And you do your maybe hour, maybe 2 hours walk around Machu Picchu, and you get to the end and you're like, I really don't want to leave. I am at one of the wonders of the world here. And this is, top 5, top 3, maybe top 1 experience of my entire life. So that's the worst part, is leaving, and all of the hard work and all of the wet weather and just everything that you experienced on the INCA Trail. It doesn't get forgotten. It's very much part of the experience, but you are just like, it was all worth it. This is amazing. There's obviously an awful lot more to know about the INCA Trail, Machu Picchu, even just visiting Peru, other than these 5 things. But I wanted to talk about these 5 things particularly because I've never really heard anyone else talk about them. Hopefully this has given you some insight into the INCA Trail, particularly in wet season. But I would encourage you to learn as much as you can about packing, about everything about the trip before you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is slightly different to the rest of my content, but travel is a huge part of my life and therefore a huge part of my content. So if you'd like to see more travel as well as the rest of my life, please do subscribe to my vlog, and do remember to like this video as well. It really means a lot to me, and do let me know if you have any other questions about the INCA Trail, Peru, Cuzco, during wet season or not. I will try my very best to help. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy your trip along the INCA Trail and you take care of yourself, and I will see you next video. Bye.